She came to the park for quiet. What she got was a confrontation that would shake the pillars of justice in Summit Springs. Camille Rhodes, a poised civil rights attorney, never imagined that a peaceful afternoon with a book would end in handcuffs. But when two officers approach with suspicion instead of cause, a silent battle begins, one where law, dignity, and identity collide. What they didn't know was that the woman they humiliated wasn't just any black woman on a bench. She was the law. And this story was far from over. Camille Rhodes turned the page of her thick, leather-bound book, unaware that within minutes she'd be judged not for what she'd done, but simply for who she was. The September light slanted long and golden across Summit Springs Park, warming the bench beneath her and casting gentle ripples over the pond's still surface. Children's laughter floated on the breeze. Somewhere to her left, a father reminded his son to zip his jacket. Camille remained still, tucked beneath the fading canopy of a maple tree, a brief island of solitude in a life perpetually pulled by duty. Her eyes tracked each word on the page, but her hand occasionally drifted to her left wrist, a habit she never lost. The worn leather band of her father's watch hugged her skin. It wasn't fancy, but it was precise, methodical, unshaken. Just like the man who gave it to her. Only stops ticking when the law does, he used to say. She believed that once. She still wanted to. The soft purr of tires on pavement pulled her attention away. A police cruiser rolled slowly into view, its presence unannounced but oddly deliberate. She watched it ease to a stop near the curb. No lights, no sirens, just intent. Two officers stepped out, one tall and sharp-chinned, scanning the park with a practiced squint. The other, heavier, younger, seemed to linger half a step behind. Camille recognized the dynamic immediately, dominance and silent support. The taller one spotted her and changed course. She closed her book with quiet care, laying it across her lap. "Ma'am," the lead officer said as he approached, his tone already laced with authority. "Mind if we ask what you're doing here?" Camille tilted her head slightly. "Enjoying a book. On a public bench. Is there a problem?" "Got a call about suspicious activity," he replied, eyes narrowing as if her calmness irritated him. "We're following up." She nodded slowly. "Well, I'm a local. Camille Rhodes, civil rights attorney." She reached into her bag, methodically, and pulled out her driver's license, holding it between two fingers without flinching. The younger officer took it. The other one, his badge read Wilkins, folded his arms. "That's quite a title," he said, mouth twitching at one corner. "Always carry books like that? I enjoy reading." "By yourself, huh?" Wilkins stepped closer, too close for it to be casual. "Waiting for someone?" "No," Camille said plainly. "And unless you're investigating a specific crime, I'd like to return to my afternoon." The license came back to her hand, almost tossed. "Still seems off," the younger officer. Donnelly mumbled, though his tone lacked conviction. Camille stood, tucking the book into her satchel. "If I'm not being detained, I'll be on my way." Wilkins placed a hand on her arm. "That's resisting." Her breath caught. "What are you doing?" "Stop resisting," he repeated louder, though she hadn't moved. Several heads turned. A mother pulled her daughter close. A jogger slowed to a near stop, frowning. Camille didn't raise her voice. "Officer, I am not resisting. I am standing still and complying." Wilkins squeezed harder. "You're escalating." Donnelly hovered, uncertain. From behind a row of low shrubs, a teenager shifted position. His phone was angled toward the confrontation, recording silently. His eyes darted between Camille and the officers, but he stayed hidden. The screen captured every second, every tightening muscle, every flicker of indignation in Camille's eyes that she kept from becoming words. The cuffs came out. Cold metal snapped around her wrists. As she was turned toward the cruiser, the book slipped from her bag and hit the ground with a soft thud. She glanced back at it, at the pages fluttering like they were searching for the justice she'd spent her life upholding. They opened the back door. Wilkins guided her in, not roughly, but not gently either. The door shut behind her, sealing her inside. Through the glass, she saw Edna Callahan, an old woman she knew only by face, watching from another bench, lips thin with uncertainty. The woman said nothing. Camille sat stiffly, her wrists stinging from the tightness of the cuffs, but she didn't look away. Her father's watch ticked steadily. Avery's hand tightened on his phone, his voice low. "This is going online tonight." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing Camille in institutional white as the shutter clicked. Her mugshot a stain on a life built on law. The camera didn't blink. Neither did she. Her jaw was set, the skin under her eyes hollow with disbelief. Camille stood on the gray linoleum floor like a statue carved from restraint. She had guided clients through this moment before, calming them, reminding them to stay silent, to breathe, to trust the process. But none of those scripts had accounted for this. Not for the cold steel of the handcuffs that had now been replaced by the cold indifference of the system she once believed she could navigate. "Name?" the desk sergeant droned. "You have it." A long pause. He tapped the keys anyway, fingers indifferent, never lifting his eyes. Wilkins stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the booking like it was a private performance for his ego. "Never thought I'd see the day a civil rights lawyer ends up in holding," he said, not loud, but just enough. "She fits the profile," Donnelly muttered beside him, then offered a weak grin, already folding under his own discomfort. Camille didn't answer. The room didn't deserve her voice. Not yet. The fingerprint scanner smudged her skin in black and oil. She was told to remove her shoes, her belt, her watch. The watch. She hesitated, just for a breath. Wilkins caught it. "Sentimental?" he asked, smirking. She handed it over without a word. The tick-tick-tick that once grounded her was now in a plastic bin beside a paper inventory form. When they took her to the holding cell, the walls were an unfeeling off-white, chipped at the edges, unbothered by the suffering they'd witnessed over decades. The bench was metal and colder than the cuffs had been. A single flickering bulb hummed near the ceiling, offering no warmth. She asked for a phone call. The sergeant said, "Later." No explanation, just the shrug of routine power. Alone, Camille sat back and studied the cracks along the cinder block walls. Some ran horizontally, like timelines gone crooked. Others spiked downward, like fault lines waiting to break. She imagined each one as a name, a client, a case, a story. She had fought for justice in these walls. Now, they pressed back. Time crawled. Her body stiffened. Her eyes remained dry. But her thoughts raced. Rage, yes. But deeper still, a quiet calculation began to take shape. She traced it like the echo of her father's voice in her memory. "Never let your hands shake. Only your voice if you must." She remembered the courtroom he used to preside over in East Denver. He'd tell her to observe how judges use silence, not as absence, but as weight. You want them to lean in, not back away. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Midnight. The latch clicked. The door opened. A young officer stood in the threshold. He didn't meet her eyes. "You made bail." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Camille stood. Her joints ached, but her spine stayed straight. She walked past him, without hesitation. Her shoes clacked against the floor, slow and steady. The officers remained silent behind the glass as she retrieved her watch. She slipped it back onto her wrist with deliberate calm. Outside, the air smelled of dry pavement and distant pine. Street lamps lit the lot in uneven pools. The night had grown colder. Linda stood at the curb, arms folded, coat wrapped tight. The worry on her face faded slightly as she saw Camille approach. Camille's voice was low but sharp. They arrested the wrong black woman. Camille's heels echoed down the courthouse hallway, same corridor she'd defended clients in for years, now leading her toward an entirely different role. She passed portraits of judges long retired, their oil-painted gazes following her, as if trying to place the shift in her step, the shift in her silence. The marble underfoot reflected her outline with a faint shimmer, a ghost of her old self layered beneath the posture she carried now, more rigid, more watchful. She hadn't intended to return so soon. But justice, like time, didn't pause for pain. The door to Judge Hastings' chambers was slightly ajar. Camille knocked once and stepped in. The office still smelled like old wood and lemon oil. Lenore Hastings looked up from a legal brief, glasses resting low on her nose, her expression unreadable but warm in its restraint. "I was hoping you'd say yes," Hastings said, even before Camille sat. "We need someone steady to fill in next week. You're the only person I trust not to make it personal." Camille hesitated. "Are we pretending it won't be personal?" "No," Hastings replied, blunt as ever. "But I'm trusting you to make it professional." She handed Camille a slim folder, brief, with 3 pages clipped neatly inside. Temporary judicial assignment. Administrative misconduct hearings. Limited jurisdiction. The kind of job no one wanted, but someone had to do. Camille scanned it in silence. Her name at the top. Her new title, Honorable Camille Rhodes, Acting Circuit Judge. Her fingers didn't tremble, but her throat tightened as she closed the folder. "I've never worn the robe." "It wears differently than a defense brief," Hastings said, rising slowly. "Heavier, because it shouldn't bend." Camille left with the folder in hand and a knot just below her ribs. In the corridor, Linda was waiting by the vending machine, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. When she saw Camille, she straightened. "You're doing it," Linda said, not asking. "I am." Linda glanced around the empty hallway. "It's not too late to say no." Camille shook her head. "It's exactly too late." They walked together to Camille's office, where the court clerk had already slipped a stack of dockets under her door. The manila folder on top was labeled in black ink, 1187 Internal Affairs Hearing. She opened it casually, scanning the names, then stopped cold. Wilkins, Donnelly. Her eyes froze on the print, the rest of the page blurred. Linda stepped forward, reading over her shoulder. "No," Linda said, almost a whisper. "That can't be right." Camille's voice was even. "It is. You can recuse." "If I do, they win twice," Camille replied. "Once in the park, and again in this building." Linda closed the folder for her. "Then let's make sure they don't win a third time." That night, Camille sat at her desk, the same desk where she once planned defenses for clients arrested in this very town. She now mapped a different terrain, not just facts and precedents, but restraint, dignity, clarity. The black robe hung behind her office door. She hadn't touched it yet. Across town, Edna Callahan sat in her living room, the local news flickering in the background. She nearly dropped her teacup when Camille's face appeared on the screen beside a headline, "Former attorney appointed interim judge amid officer misconduct hearings." Edna leaned forward. The woman from the park. The one with the book. The one she hadn't defended. Morning came crisp and quiet. Camille stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the robe over her shoulders. It was heavier than she expected. Not itchy, not stiff, just weighted. She fastened the clasp at her collar and paused, hands brushing the cloth once, then twice. She picked up her father's watch and slid it onto her wrist beneath the sleeve. She walked into the courtroom before the gallery opened, before the clerks arrived, and stood behind the bench. The sunlight slanted through the tall windows, striping the hardwood floor like fingers of judgment. For a moment, she simply stood there. Not moving, not adjusting, becoming. The next morning, the courtroom doors open. Wilkins and Donnelly stroll in, chuckling. They freeze mid-step when they see who's sitting at the bench. Camille adjusted her robe, steadying herself before entering the courtroom. Not as a lawyer, not as a victim, but as a judge who'd once worn handcuffs inside the same county. She took a measured breath outside courtroom 2A, one hand resting momentarily on the brass door handle, the other brushing the crease of her robe as if smoothing away something unseen. Inside, the hum of voices dipped low. Curiosity mingled with skepticism. She heard the shuffling of gallery seats, the soft clack of camera lenses being adjusted in the back. Word had gotten out, not just about the case, but about her. Camille stepped in. The room quieted, not from protocol, but from presence. She walked to the bench, slow but unshaken. As she ascended the steps, she caught Edna Callahan's gaze from the third row, wrinkled hands folded, eyes wide. Avery Green sat nearby, hoodie pulled low, phone off but resting in his lap. His jaw was tight, knuckles white. He didn't blink. Camille reached her chair and stood a beat longer than necessary before sitting. She scanned the courtroom once, expression unreadable. "This court is now in session," she said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it cut the air like a gavel. The prosecutor stood, methodical and collected. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here to address serious allegations of misconduct and excessive force against officers Trent Wilkins and Rick Donnelly, as brought forth in Case 1187. He gestured to the screen beside the jury box. With a tap, the video began to play. Muted at first. Camille on the park bench, the cruiser pulling in. The slow escalation. Wilkins leaning in. The handcuffs. The book falling. Her silence. Her composure. Then, Avery's quiet voice at the end. "This is going online tonight." The room remained silent for several beats after it ended. The prosecutor continued. "In addition to this footage, Your Honor, we will present witness testimony and prior complaints tied to both officers." Wilkins shifted in his seat. Donnelly leaned back, blinking fast. The first witness, Ian Caldwell, was called. He walked carefully to the stand, clutching a folded note in his hand that he never read. His voice was soft, but every word landed clear. "It was supposed to be just a stop," he said. "They didn't ask. They grabbed. One officer laughed when I tried to speak. His eyes dropped to the floor. I was raised to believe if I didn't fight back, I'd be safe." The prosecutor approached gently. "And were you given a chance to explain?" Ian shook his head. Wilkins, from the defense table, muttered under his breath. Donnelly elbowed him once. The defense attorney, slick-haired and tight-lipped, stood. "Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned you were nervous. Is it possible that you misread the officer's actions? Emotions can color memory." Before Ian could answer, Camille spoke. "Counselor," she said, her voice as cool as polished steel, "the court reminds you this is a hearing of fact, not supposition. Proceed carefully." The gallery stirred. Wilkins tensed. The prosecutor resumed, now buoyed. "Let's talk about patterns," he said. "2 previous complaints. Nearly identical. Same language. Same tactics." Wilkins glared, his neck reddening. "This is a setup," he barked, standing. Camille didn't flinch. "This is a courtroom," she replied, without raising her voice. "Sit down." The silence that followed was complete. Wilkins sat, his lips clenched. Donnelly looked anywhere but at the bench. Camille let the moment breathe. Then she reached for the gavel and struck it. Not hard, but with precision. The sound echoed once, twice, then faded. That was enough. Recess was called. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the buzz began. Reporters whispered into phones. Edna wiped beneath her glasses. Avery leaned against the wall, phone dark but hand shaking slightly. At the far end of the hall, Donnelly leaned toward Wilkins. His voice was tight. "Did you know she was a judge?" Wilkins replies, almost to himself. "She wasn't back then." Outside the courthouse, the crowd swelled. Some carried signs, some stared silently, but all waited for what came next. Their faces were a mosaic of expressions: hope, defiance, doubt. Camille caught glimpses of them through the tinted glass of the lobby as she made her way to the elevator. One woman clutched a hand-lettered sign that read, "Justice is not a favor, it's a right." Another held nothing at all, just watched, arms folded tight against the autumn breeze. Phones hovered in mid-air, not always recording, sometimes just held like talismans, proof that people were watching this moment in real time. 2 weeks ago, Camille had sat on a park bench and felt eyes on her laced with suspicion. Now every gaze held weight, not of accusation, but of expectation. The elevator doors opened. She didn't step in. That night, she sat at her dining table, the case files spread like a battlefield before her. The lamplight threw soft shadows across the paper edges, and the only sound was the scratch of her pen, underlining phrases, circling contradictions. The robe hung on the back of her chair, unworn since the hearing, but close. Her phone buzzed once. "Linda." "Take a breath," the message read. She didn't reply. By 3 a.m., her hands had stopped moving. She leaned back, stared at the files, but didn't see them. Instead, her gaze drifted toward the hallway mirror. Her reflection met her, still cloaked in composure, but thinner somehow, stretched by the weight of scrutiny. The next morning, Camille walked the long way to the courthouse, past the corner cafe, past the bookstore she used to visit every Friday, past the park. She paused near the bench. It was empty now, dappled in morning light. A young girl sat nearby with a sketchpad, not noticing Camille at all. A man jogging nodded respectfully as he passed. A small gesture. A quiet reversal. At Ruby's Diner, the bell above the door chimed as she entered. Judge Hastings was already there, newspaper folded, coffee half gone. She didn't smile when Camille sat down, just looked at her for a long moment. "You're tired," Hastings said. "I'm steady." Don't confuse the two. The server refilled Camille's mug. Hastings leaned in. "You carry more than law now. You carry eyes. Don't let that paralyze you." Camille stirred her coffee without sipping. Hastings slid a napkin across the table. On it, a scribbled, quote, "Be just, not just seen." Then she stood and left without another word. Later that afternoon, Camille sat in the back row of a youth town hall meeting at the community center. Avery Green stood at the podium, face serious, hands gripping the edges. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, not in years, but in conviction. "Silence isn't surrender," he said. "Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes it's the loudest thing we can do." A ripple of nods moved through the crowd. Camille didn't speak, she just listened, letting the echo of his words settle into her. That evening, she found the letter in her mailbox. It was handwritten in tight cursive on lined paper. "Ms. Rhodes, I saw you once and said nothing. I thought I knew who you were. I didn't. Now I watch you and remember your name with pride. Thank you for standing tall when others looked away. Edna Callahan." She read it twice before folding it neatly and tucking it inside her case folder. Back at her desk, the arrest video played on loop. Silent. Camille watched herself being cuffed, her body calm, her voice unreadable, the book on the ground, the watch ticking. She didn't flinch, but slowly, deliberately, she reached for the watch now wrapped around her wrist. She unclasped it, laid it beside the file, marked 1187, her fingers curled around her pen. She opened her notepad to a fresh page, and in dark, deliberate strokes, wrote a single word: accountability. Camille stood as the courtroom filled to capacity. The sentence wasn't just for them. It was a measure of whether justice meant anything in Summit Springs. The morning light filtered in through the high windows, soft and cool, casting long bars of brightness across the polished floor. Every footstep, every whisper from the gallery seemed subdued, like the room itself was holding its breath. Courtroom 2A hadn't seen this many people in years. Reporters lined the back, their cameras lowered for now. In the front row, Avery sat quietly beside Ian Caldwell. Edna Callahan clutched a folded tissue in one hand. Linda stood near the side rail, arms crossed, gaze steady. Camille walked to the bench and took her seat. No robe adjustment this time, no glancing at her notes. Her composure was complete, formed not from indifference, but from the gravity of what had led them all here. She looked down at the docket, then up at Wilkins and Donnelly, seated like statues. No smirks, no whispers, their shoulders hunched inward. Wilkins' hands were clasped tight, jaw set. Donnelly stared at the table. The prosecutor stood for closing remarks, brief and composed. This court has been asked to determine not just whether a line was crossed, but whether that line should remain invisible to those who carry badges. The defense attorney muttered a few sentences in reply, words that fell flat in the stillness. Camille nodded once. She spoke slowly, clearly, her voice carrying not by volume, but by weight. This court recognizes the authority granted to law enforcement officers. With that authority comes responsibility, measured not in the absence of mistakes, but in the presence of accountability. Wilkins lifted his eyes toward her, but she didn't stop. Officers Wilkins and Donnelly, the evidence presented shows a disregard for civil procedure, the escalation of force without cause, and conduct unbefitting your roles. She paused. This court issues the following ruling: a 3-month suspension from duty without pay. Mandatory participation in civil rights and de-escalation training, certified by an external agency. A permanent disciplinary mark on both of your records. And a written public apology to be issued to Ms. Rhodes in the Summit Springs community. Her voice didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't soften. This court holds power accountable not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. A silence followed, long and unbroken. Then Wilkins stood slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was rough, unused to the shape of the words. Camille didn't blink. "That begins with action," she said, and then she raised the gavel. The strike was deliberate, not harsh, not theatrical, just final, a punctuation. Avery nodded once, slow. Ian's eyes shimmered but held. Edna wiped hers with her tissue, her hands trembling. Camille sat still for a moment after, letting the silence settle. The room emptied gradually, respectfully. No one rushed out. They filtered past reporters, past murmuring staff, past the weight of what had just occurred. Outside, crisp leaves skittered along the sidewalk. The crowd waited behind a low barrier, cameras ready but distant. A voice called out from the throng. "Any comment, Judge Rhodes?" Camille turned, her coat draped over one arm. In the pocket, her father's watch lay quiet. She no longer needed its ticking to steady her. She faced the lens, eyes unwavering. Let the system hear this. We are not invisible anymore. She stood beneath the autumn light, the courthouse now quieter, her robe folded neatly over one arm, the watch of her father no longer guiding her wrist but resting in her coat pocket, carried, not clung to. Camille had spoken not with vengeance, but with measure, showing that real justice doesn't roar, it resonates. In a world quick to label, she reminded everyone that dignity isn't a performance, and restraint is sometimes the sharpest rebuke. What she restored wasn't only order to a courtroom, but hope to a community that had almost forgotten what fairness could sound like. If this story stirred something in you, let it ripple forward, because the next verdict might not come from a judge, but from how we choose to see one another.